Hello, welcome to From Campus to Careers, the Careers and Placements podcast, where we help Aston students take the next step towards their future careers. I'm Andy from the Careers and Placements team, and this episode is part of our 4-part series that we are using to promote the Power Skills. The Power Skills have been embedded into every undergraduate course here at Aston, and are there to help students be prepared for the modern workplace and the global challenges facing them. I'm joined today by Rabia Ahmed, Senior Lecturer and Academic EDI Lead here at Aston University. Rabia has extensive experience across healthcare, higher education and leadership, and is passionate about building inclusive environments where people and ideas can thrive. And supporting me today in the conversation is Jennifer Jones from our Careers and Placements team. Jennifer is a strong EDI advocate within the team and brings valuable insight from her previous work helping students to prepare for placements. And now in her current role, she creates work experience opportunities for students across the university. Together, we'll be exploring what inclusive leadership looks like in practice, why it's such a powerful skill for the modern workplace, and how students can begin building it through their studies, placements, and everyday experience. Without further ado, let's get on with the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Rabia.
Thank you.
Could you start by just telling us about your role here at Aston and what your work as academic EDI lead actually involves?
Okay, so I guess I have two parts to my job. Part of my job is I am an academic in the School of Pharmacy, so I have a day job where I do teaching, assessment, learning, etc. And then the other significant part of my role is the work that I do for the university as academic lead for EDI. And that role involves looking across our student and staff cohorts and our wider stakeholders and thinking about how inclusion is lived out at the university. So that could include things like charter mark work, so Athena Swan, Race Equality Charter, Disabled Student Commitment. And these are external quality marks for the work that we do at the university, but also some quite meaningful work with our student union colleagues, our staff networks and others to kind of work out not just how we demonstrate inclusion, but what our flavour of inclusion is at Aston and how we continue to develop that.
Well, fantastic. And I know you've had, a varied career across pharmacy, leadership.
Yep.
What kind of brought around this sort of work that you're doing now in this space?
That's a good question. Whenever I talk to students, I always say that it's when you look at someone at a particular point in their career, it's really easy to think that everything they did was really planned, that, they had an A to Z about how they were going to get there and they did those things and it got them there. And I think now more than ever, that is really not true. But if I reflect on my own career, there were things that I was passionate about probably always. And wherever I was working, whatever I was doing, those things were important and I found ways to be involved in that work. So early on in my career, I was really interested in education. So when I was working in practice, I found opportunities to be involved in teaching and learning of colleagues in my profession and also others. And then when I moved to academia, whilst I was able to fulfill that aspect of my interest, which was around education, I realised there was another gulf opening, which was around inclusion. And I could see that that was having big impacts on how students progress, succeed, and where they end up. And that became something that I became passionate about. And over time, I found different ways of getting involved in things that led me to where I am. So I would say it's, I took the Scenic route. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't always intentional, but it was driven by my interest. So for example, early on, I was quite passionate about inclusion, and particularly at the time that I was working at Aston, there was a gap in gender equity that was across the sector, not particularly here. And there was a lot of discussion about, well, how do we address that? So myself and my colleague, a very esteemed colleague, Professor Hannah Bartlett, we co-founded Inspiring Women at Aston, which is a staff network focused on gender equity. And that did a lot of really important work, which supported things like Athena Swan at the university. And through doing that kind of activity, that wasn't really part of my job, but I was interested in it, led me into some of the work that I now do.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that idea of you didn't necessarily have a straight path that you've been following the whole way. That idea is kind of a bit like a squiggly career where you jump around from different things. And now where you are, you can see different bits of the puzzle that you can pick and choose from and that have helped you get to where you are now. Yeah. And I think that that's really useful for people who are just starting out on their career journey to understand that they don't necessarily have to have all those pieces of the puzzle straight away, and they can pick and choose and cut and paste as they go. And from what I was hearing, from what you were saying, was that you stayed passionate about what you were interested in and you let that guide you.
Yes.
That maybe made the work feel authentic no matter what you were doing.
Yes, I think that's a really eloquent way of putting it, actually. I should have said that.
Yeah. I think we talk about it a lot with students, or try to, I think, in my experience as well. It's hindsight where you look back and think, oh, when I did that, actually, that helped me get that job interview. And then I met that person there, and at the time, you don't even notice it happening. But then you look back over 10, 15, 20 years, whatever, and you can join that together.
Absolutely, yeah.
Was there a particular moment or experience that really shaped your approach to leadership in particular?
Yes, there is. So I'm very lucky in that I have fantastic parents, like everybody does, but my mum in particular, she was a head teacher. And she's retired now, but she was an amazing head teacher and a fantastic leader. And I guess her approach, even though at that time that she was, at the height of her career, inclusion wasn't something that people talked about because it wasn't that, we weren't in that time. But that is what she practiced in her day to day. So I had the privilege of seeing that up close and having those dinner table conversations that allowed me to kind of shape my thinking about what I would like to be when I grow up, but also what I would like to be when I became somebody who had a profession or was doing something in the world. So for me, that was very formative. But of course, since that time, I've met some really, really excellent colleagues. I mentioned earlier, my colleague, Professor Hannah Bartlett, she's an amazing person to work with. And she was just a really inspiring leader. Her openness, her willingness to bring everyone with her, her passion, even when it was really difficult, she persisted, but she was okay with vulnerability, and I think that was really powerful. And it was a way of demonstrating leadership in a different way. And I think I have she's still somebody I keep in touch with, and she was an alumna at the university, even though she's left. But that was, watching her at the time when we were working together was really formative as well for me.
Great, thank you for sharing that.
Fascinating. You often, again, you're seeing role models without even realising at the time sometimes, like parents can be such key role models to people without even realising. And why do you think inclusive leadership is such a sort of important skill for our students kind of taking forward into their careers?
I think it is important, but I think it's also important for us to acknowledge that the rhetoric and the landscape is such that inclusion is not necessarily being prioritized everywhere. But that doesn't mean it isn't important, because actually, if you think about the way jobs are changing, generative AI is, on the horizon. We've got, AI infiltrating every aspect of work. The difference between AI and a person is the fact that the person is a person and knows how to deal with the messiness of people. And that's what inclusion is about. It's not about saying everything that everyone does is okay. It is saying that there's a space for that, and that we have to learn to work with the messiness of people. And I think that's where people, particularly who are inclusive in the way that they work, bring an extra element and something that's really helpful to employers. Because in the end, even if we're using a lot of technology, this room is full of technology, we all use it all the time, whatever large language model people are using in their work. But the reality is that the output of all of this stuff is for people. And without an inclusive lens, it's very difficult even to be profitable, because you're only reaching a subsection of people, not everybody.
It's amazing. No matter what kind of we talk about or what conversations happening, AI comes into the agenda at some point today. It's always, and obviously that's one of our other power skills as well.
Yes.
That is being taught at the moment. From an employer perspective, how might kind of inclusive leadership appear in an interview or an application from a student?
I think, I will say I feel for students, because it's quite challenging actually to in an application or an interview have a balance between focusing on your own achievement but recognizing other people. within that journey and that process. And I think that is what employees look for. It's not a tick box. You feel it when it's authentic from a person. So in an application, it tends to be more limited, probably, simply because you need to talk about your achievements, your successes. You can still acknowledge teams and others around you, but you have to keep it centered on yourself. But when you're in an interview where you're having a discussion and it's much more natural, I think it's much easier to bring across how you bring people with you and a recognition that nobody achieves anything on their own. So, even being a leader, you can't be a leader without people.
Yeah.
Those you're just talking to yourself. So you can present it however you wish, but without acknowledging those people that are part of that journey and part of how you actually achieve whatever it is that you're doing, it becomes across inauthentic. And I think this is, again, where a person will pick that up. It's not always tangible in that there's buzzwords that you can use. It is the way that you sit, stand, present yourself, relate to others and the environment, which demonstrates whether you're inclusive or not.
We see that a lot in our work, Andy, when we're working with students. Maybe they've gone to an assessment centre and it's a group activity.
Yeah.
I was thinking exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and they maybe focus so much on achieving what the task is on the surface level that they forget to work with other people.
That's right.
How important would you say that teamwork and communication is when it comes to inclusive leadership?
It's critical. It's critical. Inclusion essentially is about how you bring very disparate people together, not necessarily to agree on everything, but to feel part of whatever it is that you're trying to achieve as a collective. And you cannot do that without excellent communication skills. And, it's very easy to say I have good communication skills, but the reality is it is about being able to deal with difficulty and being able to be creative and try different things. So sometimes you have to do the opposite of what your instinct might be, because actually that's what that situation calls for. And it's not something that you can suddenly just have. Different people have different propensities for these skills, but you can develop them through observation, through, training as well, I'm sure. But I found that the spaces where I've developed most in terms of teamwork and communication have been through just doing and observing what's around me, because there are people who do it excellently. And you can learn a lot from them, but you can also learn a lot from when people do it badly, because you think to yourself, that didn't go well. Why? And how would I have done it differently? And even that very difficult situation becomes a learning experience then.
Fascinating. And it might be a challenge for some students. They might not sort of see themselves as leaders yet. What does it maybe look like in terms of inclusive leadership at this stage of their career journey as students, do you think?
I think that's a good question, because, students will think, well, what am I leading? I'm just studying. But actually, it is about developing skills that will enable you to do that when you are in a position that you will lead in future. So if you're inclusive now, when you become a leader, you will be an inclusive leader. So to me, there's two parts to it. One is, how do you exist amongst other people? How do you bring people with you? How do you make people feel seen and heard? Psychological safety is a big part of that. And that isn't to say that everybody can say anything they like. It is that people feel empowered to speak without judgment, that they will be at least heard, and that if there is critique, it will be done with kindness, perhaps, and a view that we're all actually trying to do the same thing. So I think sometimes it can be in simple things like group work. So all of our students will engage in group work, presentations, different types of assessments, and even the way that they deal with each other in those sometimes quite intense situations, because they all want to get a really good mark. If they can do it with a view of what's the most effective way, not just to get the task done, which is what you talked about earlier, Jen, but also to do this in a way that brings people with me, then it's not just about the task, because it's not about just what you achieve, it's how you get there. You can get to the same outcome, but alienate everybody and nobody wants to work with you again.
And going back to what you mentioned, Jen, in terms of like students at an assessment centre and things like that, just having been on the other side of those, it's so often just a little comment from someone who says, bring someone into the conversation, that is kind of a big tick for someone to see that people are including people in that.
Absolutely.
And it's something tricky to I would often tell students to try and do that, but it kind of can't be taught maybe, but it's trying to think about everyone in that situation to
yeah, and remembering that it's easy to be interested in people who are similar to us. That's just the way we're wired. As you know, it's our biology. We gravitate to what is familiar. But people who are different to us, and that could be the person who's quieter if you're louder, or the person who just wants a bit more time to think about it, that often their perspective is unique, and that sometimes results in a better outcome. So, you know, to give you an example, we recently, I was working with some stakeholders on an event, and we were having a lot of issues with how it was going to work, and there were last minute cancellations, and everybody was feeling like, okay, well, we either shift the day or we cancel it, or what should we do? And somebody was like, well, why don't we just do 2 days? Yeah. And that was something, that was a left field idea. It wasn't something we were thinking about at that moment, but it came from that space being a very inclusive space where every voice was valid and every voice was heard. But allowing those pauses where you just don't barrel towards the problem and like, well, let's just do this as quickly as we possibly can. But the space for all the different types of people who think differently, who maybe need a bit more time, maybe want to write things down, maybe want to, you know, draw a picture, whatever it is that they want to do. Or just talk it out. You know, some people think as they talk. So you have to create spaces for all of that. And it's not easy to do. But I think it's just about trying to fundamentally have a sense of what is fair and try to be fair when you're working with other people.
You were talking earlier about like reflecting on what you see around you as well.
Yes.
I think that that's useful here as well, where people can think, how is this environment making me feel? Therefore, how is it probably likely going to make other people feel? How can I influence this environment to make it more inclusive, accessible, positive, even? That's a really interesting addition. I was going to ask you for an example, but you provided one already, so thank you very much.
And obviously, Aston has embedded inclusive leadership into all our programs as part of Power Skills. Why do you think that is such a kind of powerful move as a university right now?
I think it puts inclusion at the heart of what we do, and it makes it visible. Because, you know, as I said before, I think sometimes words like inclusion, they're difficult to understand. Because what does it mean? But I think it's one of those things, you feel it before you know what it is. You feel that this is a space where everyone's welcome, everyone's voice will be heard, and will be respected. And I think by putting inclusive leader as one of our 4 power skills, it sets the tone that this university values inclusion, but also that we are looking ahead to the future of what graduates need to be able to do. Because I said it earlier, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Everywhere you go right now, people are talking about AI. So I was at an event earlier this week, which was about Black talent and leadership in STEM. And we were talking about AI and a data-driven approach to EDI. And again, it was the same discussion. It's that, you know, what is the place for people and how do we look at inclusion given the pace of change? But actually inclusion never goes away. It doesn't matter how much technology, you know, eases some of the kind of routine tasks that we all undertake, and maybe it's changing the way graduates see their futures. There's a lot of concern about, you know, are they going to be graduate entry jobs? But actually, I think what a human can do, a machine will never do. And so these skills that perhaps previously weren't as valued will become more valuable. Because, you know, you can have a task finish thing and an AI might be able to do it, but talking to a person and bringing them from a point of, I'm not interested in this, to actually I'm open to it. A person does that. Yeah.
And on a slightly different note, if someone is interested to actually involve EDI and inclusion in their kind of career as part of like you have done, would there be any sort of tips or ideas for students to take that into their career in a more broader sense?
I would say that there are people whose career is working in the EDI space. I'm not one of them in that it's a part of my job, not the whole. But I think at this time, particularly, it's very difficult to be in that space and work in that space. A lot of large companies are moving away from, you know, talking about inclusion openly in a meaningful way, given, you know, political landscapes changing. And that will always happen at different points in time. Now, 10 years, things will change again. So I think, to me, inclusive practice is about living it yourself. And as I said earlier, I mean, I didn't plan to be where I am today, in the job that I am today, but opportunities came because I followed what was important to me. So I think if it is important to you, look at how you can get involved in it, whatever you're doing, you could be a software engineer, but there will be opportunities to work and support that. And sometimes that's got nothing to do with your job. So it may be, for example, doing something from with stakeholders. It could be, a volunteering opportunity, whatever it is. And then sometimes if the right things line up, so something around your career and EDI, you'll be in the right space to take up the opportunity. But EDI practitioners who work in that space formally, obviously they've got, specific training and all that kind of thing. But people who do it alongside a different career, that's often the way that it goes. So I think the smart move is to find ways to be involved in a way that feels comfortable to you, in a way that feels authentic to you, whatever you're doing. And then when the opportunity arises, you'll be ready.
Great, thank you. And how do you hope our sort of focus on inclusion is one of the power skills will help to shape the kind of graduates that Aston produces?
Well, I hope it will shape them positively. I wrote quite a significant chunk of the Inclusive Leader Power Skills.
I thought that might be the case, but
with my excellent colleague, Professor Shivani Sharma, we wrote that together. And prior to writing it, we actually reached out to a number of large employers to ask them, in the NHS, in the corporate sector, to say, what is it from an inclusive leadership perspective you would want graduates to know before they come to you? What is it that you want them to have as a skill? And often their point is that, we can teach graduates information, we can teach them how to do things, but that way of being is not something you can easily teach. And, it is why companies use assessment centres, because they want the right fit, don't they, in terms of personality and approach. And I hope that giving students exposure to it, even though it is in quite an academic format, in that they go through a series of training and reflections and that kind of thing, but it alerts them to something that they then are aware of from year one all the way through to the end of their degree and maybe their postgrad if they stay with us for longer. And that thing of observing others, because a lot of what that module does is get students to reflect on times when they've been in similar situations, how they've handled it, how they would handle it. And I think without sitting down and thinking about it consciously, it's really easy to not have an actual approach. You're just reacting. And we need to move from reacting to actually being reflexive, which is hopefully what the inclusive leader does. And that reflexivity is an important skill, however you apply it in a workplace, not just from an inclusion perspective. It's powerful in lots of ways. And it comes down to the fact that all employment, all work points at people. So because it points at people, that reflexivity is really, really powerful.
It's fascinating. Like, thinking back to my degree, something like that in my degree would have been so interesting to just a bit different in terms of like the standard bread and butter of your actual assignments and work and everything. To do something completely different, I think, is a great opportunity for students to be able to do.
We've talked a bit about people who have that natural interest, maybe in EDI, and to follow that and just try and stay authentic. Do you have any tips or advice for people who maybe feel like they don't already have that innate desire already? How can they start to show up in that space?
I think sometimes you may not feel that you have an interest in that area, or maybe you don't feel that it's an area for you, because sometimes in the EDI space, there are particular groups that tend to form around specific demographics sometimes, or attributes. And sometimes people who want to support don't know how to, because it may not apply to you. So let's say you're not neurodiverse, but you're interested in supporting people who are neurodiverse. How do you navigate that? Because that can feel a little bit like, can I really talk about this? But actually, sometimes being a good ally is a good start. So, we all know somebody who will be, either a woman or a man, or from a particular background, or have a particular, disability or neurodiversity. And those are people in our lives. They're our family, they're our friends. So you want to support those people, even if some of those things don't apply to you. You could think about, well, how do I turn up and support this person? And then what are the ways in which to do that in a meaningful way that isn't speaking for others? And some of that is just learning more. And I think, a really good question is, I'm really interested in that experience. Could you tell me more about it? Because, there's an assumption that you already need to know everything. Actually, what inclusion is about is being curious about other people and being willing to listen and hear what the experience is like for them, even if you feel that maybe there's a different way of looking at it or whatever. But hearing from somebody how it feels on a day-to-day is very powerful. So I think there's really small things you can do that would then give you the confidence, hopefully over time, to then engage in that in a more meaningful way. And one of the most powerful things anybody can do for somebody in a minoritized group is to be a good ally.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And you've almost hit the nail on the head there, I think, in terms of my next question. But if students who are listening would take just kind of one thing away from today's discussion around like what inclusive leadership might mean, and what would you kind of want that to be, do you think?
It's difficult to say one thing.
Putting you on the spot for one thing.
But maybe going back to what I just said, try and be a good ally.
Yeah.
So and that's a good starting point, and be curious. And that's a good start to everything.
Yeah.
Because thinking you know everything is a recipe for disaster. Start with, I don't know much about that. Tell me more about it. I'm really interested. And people love talking about themselves, and very rarely do people have those conversations. We tend to talk very much about processes and structures. We don't talk about how it feels. And that actually is where a lot of the issue comes from. So if we start there, we can then build out to those processes and structures that support or don't, and how we change them.
I think it's amazing how... Sorry, Jen.
No, it's okay. I was going to say there's a lot of opportunity on campus as well for people to get involved.
Yes.
Different societies, different events that are going on. And even if you feel like that event isn't targeted at you, going and attending as an ally or as a learner
absolutely
is a really great way to show up and then become more confident in that space.
Absolutely. And university is a space where you make a lot of friends. Everybody will have a friend who maybe is in a society that they're not, so you can always go as a guest. You don't have to turn up if that feels too scary. I get that. But there's ways of doing that in that ally way, which is respectful but also allows you to develop your understanding in that space. So I think that's a really good example.
Brilliant. And we're starting to wrap up, but it's been a fantastic discussion, really interesting stuff. One question we always like to ask as a sort of final piece is if you could give your kind of younger self, say your student self, one piece of career advice. We are a careers podcast after all. What would you tell your younger self, do you think?
I think when I look back, it is just trust yourself. Trust yourself more, because I think a lot of the time when you're young and you're starting out in your degree, you finish coming to the end of your degree, you're about to start your first job, there's so much uncertainty and it's very scary and you're not sure how you're supposed to be. But if you just trust yourself to deal with what comes up, it will be easier. And that trust yourself doesn't mean that you think you know everything. It's that you trust that if there's a problem, you will find a solution. If it's difficult, you will have the resilience to keep going. And once you have that, it gives you a lot of confidence. Once you trust yourself, it gives you a lot of confidence, and that comes across to the people that you work with. And not confidence that's unwarranted, but that kind of confidence of you will figure it out. And that is really powerful in a career.
Fantastic, thank you.
A phrase that I really like is that you've made it through 100% of the days that you've already been through. So you've got a good track record, so keep going.
That's a good way of putting it.
And the sun will rise again tomorrow and you'll have your next breath and...
It will be fine. Exactly.
Perfect. Thank you very much, so much for having us, having you on the podcast today. It's been an absolutely fascinating chat.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll agree, Jen.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure.
And we look forward to hearing more about the inclusive leadership that goes on in the Power Skills at university.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of From Campus to Careers. If you like this episode, please don't forget you can follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, and do feel free to share it with a friend. If you would like to book into a one-to-one appointment with the careers team, don't forget you can do so through Aston Futures.